Monday night edition of the Anaheim Calling podcast. Dallas Eakins will be the Ducks' 10th head coach in franchise history. Jake, the time is now. Dallas Eakins is going to be the man leading the charge. What you've been calling for months here. So
For
I'm
years,
just get,
for years.
I'm just gonna cede the floor right away. This is your chance to do a little victory lap here. So by all means, go for it.
Alonzi. Now the real question is he gonna bring on as his assistant coaches Rose, and who else would be another good one to bring on? Captain Jack, I guess, would be another one. These are all Doctor Who references, though, for those of you out there completely confused, because Dallas Eakins looks exactly like David Tennant, who was the 10th Doctor. So there's your Doctor Who references out
That's
there for all
not
of you.
that's not where I was expecting you to go after months of clamoring for
Oh,
Dallas Eakins
one of the
to
things
be
I'm
on
most
head coach.
one of the things I'm most excited about is the fact that I can now tweet Doctor Who gifs, 10th Doctor clips or gifs all season long, and they're all relevant. It's gonna be
This is
amazing. It's gonna be a fun
this has
time.
been I'm really dreading where this is going,
This is
but it's
something
okay.
that Felix gets to look forward to. At some point,
This
I'm
is
going to make one of our Twitch emotes a 10th Doctor thing.
okay. But in all seriousness, this
Fair.
this news warrants a little gravitas
It
because
does. It does.
it's a round number, which for whatever reason always seems more important. He's the 10th head coach in the franchise's history, and it was a
First
search.
American-born head coach in Ducks history.
It was a search that was ongoing for quite some time. Took a lot of weird twists and turns. We heard names like Rick Bonus and Scott Sandlin and Todd Nelson. We heard a lot of names enter the fray, but like Bob Murray said today in the press conference, it always led back to Dallas,
Yes.
and that's where we are. Dallas Eakins, who has been the only head coach in the San Diego's AHL history,
Yeah.
leading them to two straight Pacific Division titles in the first two seasons or Pacific Division finals, and then falling just short of the Calder Cup final
Mm-hmm.
this season in a year where the team was constantly plagued by, well, not plagued because it's kind of part of the system, but was constantly having its roster cut and shortened because of the fact that the Ducks had so many injuries. So he's been through a lot. I think that his AHL tenure in San Diego was a successful one. Clearly, just on its face, it was successful.
Yeah.
But I also think just everything you heard, it always seemed positive. And compare that with how things went in the last time Dallas Eakins was in the NHL with the Edmonton Oilers. Did not go so well. Just
No.
above 100 games, got cut short really early. Just sounded like a toxic environment in Edmonton at that time. So now he's back to make a second impression, and it's like he kept saying. And I guess we're gonna be referencing the press conference as much as we can here, but
Yeah.
basically what really intrigued Eakins and I think encourages him about the situation is the familiarity aspect,
Yeah.
that he's not picking up from scratch. And that's, I think it's hard, even if you're the biggest, Dallas Eakins skeptic. I think it's hard to at least not be really intrigued at how this is going to go.
Yeah.
If you're a skeptic, you could say, okay, well, let's see how this flames out. And if you're someone who's optimistic, well, then I think that there's at least a lot of reason now to be at least intrigued with the Anaheim Ducks, which I just don't feel like you can't really have said in full confidence the last 2 years.
There's hope. As dumb as that sounds, there's hope. Whereas, I mean, this coming from me, who was not a fan of Carlisle when they brought him back. This past season was very, very hard to watch, and it feels like it's been a while since there's been hope for this team. And right now, it kind of feels like there is that. And granted, yes, there are some negatives that you can probably attach with Dallas Eakins. The overall, I think, public view of him from the Ducks fan base, I think, is majority positive, but there are people out there who are not the biggest fan of this hire for various reasons that we'll eventually get into. But I think the biggest thing is it's kind of an unknown, which is both a good and a bad thing. And I think it's more good
Right.
than bad for this Ducks team moving forward, because they went with old reliable and Randy Carlisle last time, and that worked out horribly. And now we get someone who, I mean, this is his second chance. That first chance did not go well. He's proven himself in the AHL, but he has a lot to prove, and he has a lot to kind of make up, and he has to really kind of lived by the words that he said with his basically with what he said about his time in Edmonton, with what he's learned. I mean, he was asked about it today in the press conference, and he even had a funny little remark with he can tell that Bob Murray was kind of was squirming in his seat when the question was asked, but he said it's a valid question to ask me because it's part of my history, and kind of addressed it and owns up to it and mans up to kind of what happened there. Really quickly, there are some people in the chat asking, is it Eakins or Eakins? It's Eakins. I heard him say that, or he mentioned that on the press conference, or not on the press conference, but on the TV broadcast with Allers and Guy Bear. That is Eakins, not like the Pokemon, pretty much, is the way that I've registered that in my head. And so I'm excited. I'm very excited, and I'm hopeful. And I think that the familiarity is a big thing. It was a big thing that set him apart for this Ducks team moving forward. I think not only that, but everything that we've heard about being able to connect with the modern day player, with the kids, because at the end of the day, the Ducks are making a youth movement. Whether they want to or not, they have to. It's where the team is going. It's where the kids are. At a certain point, every team has to do it. The league is cyclical like that, and especially in a cap era where your top guys get top dollars and they get paid into their 30s when they're going to not be producing as much as they should. You need to get value out of younger guys on their ELC, and the Ducks are in that phase right now. So in order to do that, you have to have someone that can get the most out of those kids, and Dallas is that. And you've seen that in interviews. You've seen that in what Troy Terry said, what Max Jones has said, what Kiefer Sherwood has said, what Jordan Samuels-Thomas, which is not a younger guy, kind of an older guy, and how he was able to connect with him. There's a lot of positives there, and that is all more so on kind of the man management side. But that is all very important when it comes to being a head coach.
Yes, there's certainly so many different aspects to look at here, and I think that particularly, I think it's always interesting to look at where a franchise is coming from before you start looking at where it's going. Yeah. And what the Ducks are coming from is a very kind of interesting 3-year cycle of Randy Carlyle V2. First season qualified for the Western Conference Final, and you could argue, just like almost any team that's ever played in the playoffs, I should say, you could argue that if they hadn't been injured, that they would have made it to the final. That's, I think, everyone's refrain. Even the champions, by the time the finals are over, you learn how completely crushed they were. So I don't know how totally valid that is, but there is this kind of prevailing sentiment around people who maybe are a little more forgiving of the way things went with Randy Carlyle. It's like, well, if you remember, things weren't that bad. And I actually kind of want to challenge that notion a little bit. Things weren't that bad for one season. The Ducks did make the playoffs in the second year with Randy Carlyle, were promptly swept in a series that, quite honestly, didn't feel that competitive. And then there was the third season, which we all know how that went. The Ducks had multiple double-digit losing streaks, obviously dealt with a lot of injuries, but beyond the injuries, we're just one of the worst defensive teams that we've ever seen in the modern NHL for long stretches of time. So, for the people who say, well, it wasn't that bad under Carlyle, I don't know if this math makes any. I don't know if this math makes any sense here, Jake. But 2 out of 3 subpar seasons, I believe that's 66%. It seems like the majority of his seasons in his second tenure didn't go that well. So I mean, and again, people want to say, oh well, of course, we made the playoffs the second season. Well. Okay, so you're kind of changing. You're kind of moving. Well, also you're moving the chains along at your kind of convenience because, okay, so one season making the Western Conference Finals is this great thing, and then the next barely making it in all of a sudden is acceptable. It seems like that's a total kind of revisionist argument. I think that the Ducks maybe didn't see themselves as contenders in 16 or actually 17, 18. But I think they saw themselves as more than a team that was 4 games and out in the first round. So just when you're looking at where this team was, not only was the success that they had become so accustomed to under Bruce Boudreau had it so eroded, but also I think that the overall just approach of this team from the hockey operations perspective was kind of trending in the wrong direction. You look at the usage of the top players. I mean, Corey Perry is probably most likely 100%, however you want to put it, not going to be a Duck next season. And maybe his knee was always going to be an issue, but on the wrong side of 30, you really have to wonder if playing huge minutes every night was the best for him. Ryan Getzlaf showed the first signs of decline last season, which we really haven't seen from him at all until last year. And then Ryan Kessler, his career is basically over. And again, you don't want to just pin it on their usage, but you have to think that that probably didn't help, right?
Yeah.
When the rest of the league is going towards, look at it's almost like we talk about this every year and no one learns the lesson. Look at what the St. Louis Blues did this year. Some of the players that we talked about the most during their cup run were actually their depth guys. Oscar Sundqvist, Ivan Barbashev come to mind. And even if the Ducks in a best case scenario were to make the playoffs again under Carlisle, it didn't feel like they were suited to withstand the rigors of a playoff season. And they actually didn't. The one chance that they got in there, you saw how it fell apart. So I think what should be most exciting from a Ducks perspective is that you're finally, if nothing else, going back towards kind of the just modern standards, just the average modern NHL team. You don't have to be cutting edge, but I think that this team was slipping so far behind that this is probably a welcome sight, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it definitely is, and I'm trying to find it right now, but they also hired, I believe, Jeremy Bettel. Is that his name? Apologies.
Yes, so that's the new, is it strength and development coach?
He's not strength and conditioning, but he's something along those lines. Essentially, he's more of like a sports scientist. He tracks information.
He's a director of high performance.
There we go. Director of high performance. And so basically in Toronto, he basically was known to be talking to guys and basically tell them that I can predict an injury before it ever happens. And a lot of it is by tracking body movements, by tracking usage or performance of strength and things like that with skating, by basically tracking every single bodily motion and different things like that while on the ice to be able to get as much data as possible. And so that, along with Dallas Eakins, who is a fitness freak pretty much, and it's been reported that in the AHL, he was really focused on short shifts, really having guys go as hard as they can in a short period of time, then getting to the bench. And that is more so kind of the modern day philosophy of, you shouldn't be taking longer shifts. You shouldn't be playing your top guys as forwards over 20 minutes a night in the middle of the season, because you're just going to wear them out and they're not going to have any legs come later in the season. So this all kind of takes the Ducks in the right direction in terms of using as much data as possible to keep guys fresher later into the season.
Right, absolutely. And that's the thing, is that there's a general feeling right now around the team that everything they're doing is starting to trend towards modernity, towards actually joining this new wave of sports science and, different player usage. And I think that Dallas Eakins is kind of the bellwether for all that, where there were already signs even last year, after Randy Carlisle was fired, that they were trending in that direction, bringing up all of the younger players from San Diego and pretty much giving them the rest of the regular season to perform. It wasn't like some type of, one shift at a time basis. It was just, okay, we're going to give you a real shot here, see what you have. So clearly there was already a movement towards youth at the end of last year, and now they're just following that up, kind of sprucing up that performance department. And now you have Dallas Eakins, who I think kind of represents all of that somewhere, at least stands for it.
Yep. On Dallas, you want to get into his time with Edmonton? Because that's a big talking point with a lot of different people. And I think that there's a couple different things that, after doing a bit of research today and over the last little bit, some kind of interesting takeaways that I've had from his time there. And so, first off, that team was horrible. As in, that roster was really, really bad. And so his first year and his overall tenure there was not great. You look at the underlying numbers of his time and tenure there, and it was not that fantastic. I'm trying to find it really quickly, but during his time there, overall in all 113 games that he was a head coach there, at 5-on-5, they posted a 46% Corsi for percentage, 41% goals for percentage, 45% expected goals for percentage. So overall, not great, and that first season was really, really bad there. We're talking, if I can find it really quickly, and it's not appearing for me. But basically, they were really bad. Oh, I have found it. 44% for that year in Corsi for percentage, 41%, 44% expected goals for. But that second season in those 31 games that he actually had them playing pretty decent hockey, right around 50% in everything. And this was a team that, if I were to tell you and try to ask you, who were the goaltenders on the let's go with the 2014-2015 Oilers, could you answer that off the top of your head?
Jeff Delorier?
Nope.
Oh, geez. This just got way harder. Was Al Montoya there at that time? All right, I'm out of gas.
Their two goalies were Ben Scrivens and Victor Faust.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but those are guys who have had success elsewhere. So it just didn't work out in Edmonton. They turned good goalies into really awful looking ones.
In those 31 games, they had like a 903 combined. And if I were to ask you who was there, and so, I mean, this team had decent top-end talent. They had Jordan Eberle, Taylor Hall, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. But after that, it kind of falls off really quick. This was a team that had Derek Waugh, Roy, Anton Lander, David Perron, good player, but 19 points in 38 games in that point. Andrew Ference, Marco Cabello, Matt Frazier, Leon Draisaitl in his rookie year. So this was not a very good Oilers team. This was pre-McDavid Oilers. And so the fact that with that team he was able to get them to be break even is actually pretty impressive.
Right. It's also kind of what you would hope for from that team, is that they would be approaching that. But it's something that they hadn't really been doing at that time. You know, there's going to be a lot of talk about the Edmonton days because that's the last time we saw Dallas Eakins in the NHL. But it was a while ago.
Yep.
That's kind of my take on it, is that it was a while ago. And I think, if you look at the way he's handled himself in these last 4 seasons in San Diego, I kind of trust that whatever happened in December of 2014 isn't necessarily representative of who he is now.
Yeah.
Again, I could be wrong about that. I could be completely off there, but I do think that he's done enough in-house to get a shot. There's not really any risk to the Ducks here. I don't think anyone is realistically expecting them to be contenders next season. And so if Dallas Eakins just totally flames out, well, you go in different directions.
Yeah.
There's qualified coaches everywhere. There's almost too many for the NHL. And so I don't think that there's any risk in trying this. He seemed, what I kind of was thinking about last night is that he's an upside play. I think that if you really get what you think you're getting from Dallas Eakins, there's a lot of upside there. And if it flames out, you can always fire a coach. It's not the end of the world. The way people have been framing it, talking about his Edmonton Oilers days as some type of, you got to be careful, you can't trust this guy. Why don't people feel that way about other coaches? Why don't people feel that way about the constant retreads that come through every single team? You weren't. There were some sections that were a lot quieter about Randy Carlyle's Toronto tenure when he was rehired. There were a lot of people that were much more vocal about, or I should say less vocal about, Randy Carlyle's awful Toronto tenure, which I think probably maybe it wasn't worse than Dallas Eakins' Edmonton days, but it was at least as bad. And for whatever reason, that was kind of dismissed because of the Cup win that was years before.
Yep.
So I don't know. It's interesting how people will evaluate someone who's just kind of considered an outsider.
And I think the other thing with it is the sample size is so small. 118 total games. That's really not a whole lot.
And it's also at a strange time. He was making the leap from the AHL to the NHL just like he's doing now. And also the Oilers were just stuck in, it wasn't even a rebuild because
mediocrity.
It was try to rebuild and then try to make it happen one year and just constantly cycling out coaches. Todd Nelson, another guy who a lot of people consider to be very qualified, for whatever reason, doesn't wear the kind of the Edmonton Scarlet Letter like Eakins does, even though he was the guy who came in next and didn't really do any better.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's not something that you should just totally overlook, but I think this point, we've talked about it way too much. And I think part of the reason we've talked about it so much is because the fact that there's just less information available about
Yeah.
the AHL. There's just less to readily talk about. I mean, you look at the press conference today for Dallas Eakins, I believe there was like 4 questions. So, or 5 questions. There's not a whole lot of scrutiny around here. And so when people are looking at something to talk about, they're going to look at the thing that's the most tangible, and those are the Edmonton days with Dallas Eakins.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the fact of his history, and it was the last NHL coaching job he had, so it's relevant in history, and so that's why it's going to be brought up by certain people. That's why it's going to be a crux. But I think we don't need to look a whole lot further than this current Cup final, the Cup final that just happened. That was you had Bruce Cassidy, who was the head coach of the Washington Capitals in the early 2000s and epically failed. You look at the record of that team when he was fired, it was awful. And he was able to take lessons. Granted, there was a whole lot more period or a bigger period of time between when he was fired and rehired or hired back in an NHL job. But still, that's a coach coming into his second job, taking the lessons he learned from that first job and applying it. And you also have Craig Berube, who, granted, wasn't horrible with the Flyers, but still got fired. Like, still did a poor enough job where they felt like they should let him go. And now he's come in, and whether it was just that group messing with him, whether it was him taking lessons, who knows? But it's not necessarily that that's the rule, that a coach on his second time is going to be better than his first time. But I think we have 2 recent examples of that being the case.
Right. And to your point about Bruce Cassidy, much the same situation as Dallas Eakins. He came in straight from the AHL to the NHL, from Grand Rapids to Washington in 2002. So maybe the rule is, okay, that first leap is going to be really hard. And then give it about 4 to 10 years and then come back. What's interesting with Cassidy that I didn't realize is that he went from the NHL, where he flamed out, to then the OHL as a head coach. So
really?
I think that there's always an opportunity for guys to reinvent themselves or to kind of re-examine their own core beliefs. I think that what it's about with Dallas Eakins isn't really about him. I mean, it is about him, but it's also just what he represented at the time. You know, there was a lot of talk about how he's friendlier to analytics, how he was so, adamant about players improving their diets. You know, there's the famous example, I think, that he even had vegetables for the media, which they probably should consider.
No more donuts.
They probably should consider eating. But so it was a weird time because back then analytics, in 2014, especially in Edmonton, was basically you just don't talk about that. Or if you do, you're expecting a debate right away.
That was the battleground.
Yeah. I mean, Tyler Dello, you'll remember, was the stats guy there at the time. And it was really controversial to even have a stats person. And so I think that Dallas Eakins' timing was off. If Dallas Eakins had come in hot with those beliefs in 2019 as his first NHL head coaching job, the narrative may have been a lot different. But the way that hockey works, especially in coaching, but this applies to pretty much any level, whether it's management or player, is that if you're an outsider, if you bring things to the table, if you discuss issues that other people don't, you're just going to be seen as an outsider for pretty much your entire career. That's just kind of the way it goes. And then it's up to you to reshape that narrative. And I'm not saying that Dallas Eakins is going to just conform to all of the cliches, but I think that he's probably going to do a better job now of managing that image. He probably realizes how important that is, but I would still expect him to bring most of the forward thinking that we saw of him in Edmonton, and probably more that he picked up along the way in San Diego.
Yeah. And the thing that I've always commended him on, for good and for bad, he's not afraid to try stuff. He's not afraid to kind of go out and do some things. And I mean, one of the things that's constantly brought back is the swarm in Edmonton. That was an epic failure and it didn't work well, and it's been said there. It's long been documented, and it's also been documented that only lasted like 10 games. 10, 15 games.
Yeah, but again, that's back to my point. In hockey, if you do anything that's different, you're just going to wear it forever.
Yep.
So all in all, I guess to kind of wrap up this section of the podcast, I got to say I'm in favor of this hiring, if for no other reason, because it's going to make the Ducks interesting again. So on the other side of our first break here, we're going to get probably maybe a little more Eakins talk and then into the draft. So we will be right back. Okay, back from the first intermission here. Any other lingering loose ends here regarding Dallas Eakins that you want to talk about? Maybe the hiring process. Do you want to discuss that at all?
A couple things I want to talk about here real quick on Dallas. It's funny because I think some people will view this signing as being a bit risky, seeing as what we just talked about with his tenure in Edmonton, the fact that he doesn't have much experience. But I think if you look at the grand scheme of who they were looking at hiring, and kind of what they needed to move forward, this was probably the least risky move. The fact that he
because it's in house, yeah,
and he has the knowledge of those players, and basically he was able to kind of get recommendations from them to move forward. So it's one of those things where I really kind of find it to be not a hugely risky move, but it does still have some risk associated with it because there are some unknowns with it. And one thing I also want to bring up, it was brought up by Bonnie in our Twitch chat. How much, with all this talk about coaching staffs and different things like that, with us talking about Carlisle and everything over the past couple of years, and I feel like we've definitely talked about this here and there, but I think it's always relevant to bring up whenever you're talking about coaching, is how much of an impact in terms of win, losses, and standings does a coach actually have?
It's a great question. It's really, of course, difficult to extract a coach's influence on the outcome. I do think that I'm not going to put a number on it because, to be honest, I don't know what kind of percent of impact I'd be comfortable with. But I'd say it's a significant number. I think it's almost like, I'll put it this way: having a really bad coach can kill you, or at least really bring you down. And then anything after that, you're at least giving yourself a chance. If you have even a decent coach and then to a great coach, you're putting yourself in a position to succeed. And a great coach can really swing year to year. Look at Mike Babcock and how he's come under fire in Toronto. I mean, shocker with the Toronto media, but tactics are always changing. There's always adjustments. And so I would say generally, I think that there is a significant impact that a coach can have on a team's success.
My rule of thumb that I've always kind of gone back to is I think it's about 10 wins, plus or minus 10 wins.
Right. And I guess to be clear, what I mean by significant, maybe 20 to 30%. That's a pretty big chunk of a team's success. I mean, you got to factor injury luck, player talent, depth, that type of thing. So, but I would say that if 20 to 30% is coaching talent, that's something that you definitely want to get right, because that's an easy one. That doesn't count against your cap. That doesn't, affect other positions on your roster. And so it's maybe still one of the most underutilized resources. Maybe the reality is just that there aren't that many great coaches, and that generally there's this big kind of morass in the middle, the ones that we all know are bad, and then maybe a couple of guys at the top. But as we've seen, that can be really a sliding scale. And so what did you think of, just how we got here? I think that that's where we can wrap this up. So, there was quite the interview process. A lot of people complained that this took forever. I actually don't know how long the average coaching search takes. It just felt long, maybe because we were chomping at the bit for some news instead of talking about Yanni Hakanpää. I don't know. But if you look at
Yanni Hakanpää
still hasn't been announced, by the way.
Still has not.
We
spent more time on him than I think anyone else should have.
Oh, God. But the point that I am trying to get to here is that whatever this process was, the Ducks clearly went through a list of candidates that they thought were qualified. But then you have Elliot Tieford of the Orange County Register coming out on Twitter today saying that basically he knew all along since February that it was going to be Dallas Eakins. So we've heard a lot about how ownership always favored Eakins. Was this entire process simply Murray doing his due diligence in light of the fact that almost no matter what he said, Eakins was going to get the job because that's where ownership was leaning?
Yeah, that's kind of how I took it.
That's how I see it. That's because I think, I don't know if he was really trying to sell the Samuelis on any of these candidates. Maybe he was, but I think it doesn't hurt to do your due diligence, but it certainly seemed to extend this process by quite a bit of time.
My whole view on it for a while, and we've heard rumblings here and there that it's Eakins' job to lose. I'm going to mess that up a lot moving forward. It's
weird because you've been saying Eakins this whole time, and I've been saying Eakins.
Yeah. I don't know.
So I'm going to take the
I'm
victory
just
there.
gonna keep
The
saying.
dub.
I'm just gonna keep saying Dallas. Makes my life easier.
No, you can't say Dallas because the Dallas Stars are a thing.
Sure. We'll see.
Well, no, but getting back to this
Yeah.
whole he was
So
the guy all along, I don't know how much I buy that.
I I don't know how much I buy it. I don't think they've identified him as being the head coach. I think that he was the leader in the clubhouse all along. I think that you look at what he did in San Diego. There were also some people that kind of were rumbling. I mean, Wyshynski on Puck Soup said he heard multiple times, including last week, that Bob Murray didn't really like Eakins and the way he coached that much. And so I don't know. Maybe there is something behind the fact that Bob Murray was kind of doing his due diligence and trying to convince the Samuelis to go elsewhere, but the Samuelis at the end of the day wanted Dallas Eakins. They're the owners of this team, and if you especially factor in how Randy Carlyle's tenure ended with the Ducks, and that's a guy that Bob Murray had to probably go for bat for to get the Samuelis to hire him, they probably won out on this because of the Randy Carlyle situation, and they got the guy they wanted.
Yes, I think that maybe there was a real honest attempt to look elsewhere to see what else they could bring in. But I think that my kind of sense of it is that unless one of these guys who came in absolutely swept ownership off their feet, that it was going to be Eakins. If it was just some slam dunk, legendary interview where he's pounding his fist on the table and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. That's the only scenario I can picture where you get them to change their minds. But when you're writing the checks, that's a tough person to convince.
There.
Right, exactly. And if you compare Eakins to the other candidates, so the Rick Bonuses, the Todd Nelsons, the Scott Sandlins, it's all kind of, it's all just different shades of gray to me, kind of the same type of coach, outside of maybe Bonus, but guys who aren't necessarily career head coaches in the NHL, guys who are coming either from different leagues or who have a lot of assistant experience. And so I don't know how much it necessarily changes who you bring in. I think that I think they all have a similar risk factor. And to your point, I think maybe Eakins, especially in the eyes of ownership, probably the least because he's the known commodity. He's the known quantity. And so, but I don't think, that would be a discredit to, I think, what he's done in San Diego because he's done a real bang up job there. I mean, now the Gulls are being described as a model franchise in the AHL. And of course, that's not all on Dallas Eakins, but I think how he's handled the on ice product has a lot to do with that. And so people are going to, kind of try to diminish it to, it's just because he was the most familiar guy.
Yeah.
Maybe that is indeed the case, but I think he is legitimately deserving of the opportunity.
And you look at what he's done with the prospects, what he's done to develop them as both people and as players. And granted, he's not going to be relied upon for development anymore, but he still, for younger guys, he's going to have to get the best out of them. And part of that is by bringing them up, raising them up. And if that is sending them down to the AHL, communicating with them why it's happening and talking to them and really trying to get them kind of to not put their head down on it, take this as something to fire them up and not kind of get them down a little bit. And so I think that's really important. One interesting comment to come out of today, Bob Murray was talking about analytics. And
I didn't hear this.
He did. And basically what he said is, first off, he said Dallas Eakins is not as much of an analytics person as you probably think he is. But he said, but him and I had a conversation. We've had conversations. We had one this morning about it. And our biggest thing is we both kind of view it, and there are some flaws with the way it is and some issues that we both have with it. And the biggest thing is finding the inputs and finding the correct inputs into the equation that we like and can really give us the results that we view as being useful and reliable. And so I thought that was interesting because I think that's the most I've heard Bob Murray.
He used the term inputs.
Yes.
Bob Murray's a math geek now. Yeah. Breaking news.
So he did also follow it up by essentially saying, well, but at the end of the day, this isn't baseball.
This isn't just one piece of the puzzle type thing. Yeah. I mean, but I think that you got to look at it as baby steps. This is a franchise that there's been some posturing that they are analytics friendly to the kind of outside media, but I don't really think that that's the case. I don't think that they just pay lip service. I think maybe there is a little work done internally.
Yeah.
But this is not this is a franchise that has been reported as not even having an analytics department, being the only team in the league that doesn't have one. And when you draft like the Ducks do, you can kind of get away with that because for whatever reason, credit obviously Madden, director of scouting, that they just seem to know how to target the right skill sets, the right players, and get the most out of those picks. But that can only take you so far because you've also got to look at in-game tactics. And so I am very curious to see how that will be implemented. I don't think that it's going to be Bob Murray's going to be talking about expected goals to the media by the end of next season. That's probably a bit of wishful thinking, but it's all, I think, again, this is something that I wrote about today. It's just all pushing in the right direction.
Yes.
It's all leaning in the right direction.
Yes,
That's all you can really hope for at this point.
I'm not sure if I've ever heard Bob Murray, if he's talked about analytics, it's been in a way that something dismissive about them. This is, I think, and at first when I saw the quote, because Bonnie threw it in our Slack, about this isn't baseball or something along those lines, and that he's not an analytics guy.
Did he actually say this isn't baseball? Did he say that?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I got pretty fired up by it, but I think once I actually went and listened to the actual comments, it's actually very kind of positive. I came out of it feeling good because I think it's the most I've ever heard him say on the topic of analytics, on the fact of he does look at them, and granted it may not be in the way we do, but it's pushing in the right direction, like you said. And I think that that's a very big thing.
Right. Okay. Are we moving on here to the draft or anything else?
Let's jump into some questions on Dallas Eakins before we start getting the draft. So people in the Twitch chat, if you want to throw some questions into the Twitch chat, specifically on Dallas Eakins, throw them in now. For those of you listening to the recorded version of this, we do a Twitch stream each and every time at twitch.tv/acpod, where you can support this show in a way that's completely free to you. If you have Amazon Prime, you have Twitch Prime, and you can subscribe to the show, get special badge next to your name, special emotes in the chat, and it's a really fun way to support this show and hang out with us. So let's start getting into some questions first. Bonnie chiming in with, do you see Bob Murray viewing his relevancy dwindling as these new conversations emerge about millennials and analytics?
So do we see them emerging?
Do you see Bob Murray viewing his relevancy as dwindling as these new conversations emerge?
No, I don't think that. If you're in the chair and you're getting the paycheck, I don't think you probably feel threatened by this, but you probably feel a little challenged. You probably feel like, okay, there's an undercurrent here of new thinking, and it's going to be worth at least thinking about. And so I don't think that Bob Murray feels his relevancy dwindling. He's been in professional hockey basically his entire adult life.
Yeah.
And so I don't think analytics are what's going to put him out of business. But I do think at the same time, you don't necessarily stay in this job as long as he has if you're not at least willing to consider some new point of view. At least consider it. You don't have to espouse it. You don't have to make it your complete just way of operating your franchise. But I do think he's probably going to consider it a little bit, especially now that he has a guy in Dallas Eakins who's known for looking at that. So I think his viewpoint may definitely start changing ever so slightly.
Well, and I think in sports, you constantly have to evolve. You have to constantly reinvent yourself, constantly change. If not, you're going to get left behind. And we've seen that with Randy Carlyle. Look at how quick he got left behind. And I think that maybe that was a wake-up call for Bob Murray with how quickly that kind of happened. And I think maybe this coaching hire is kind of a sign of that. And so, so I'm going to take it as he's not viewing it as his relevancy going away. I think he's potentially understanding that he needs to change and evolve a little bit.
Right. And one thing I do want to add on that really quickly here is that, just having an analytics department, I mean, I think it's obviously a positive, but it doesn't really matter if you can turn that information into something valuable, right? So if you can't communicate the information down to your players in a way that they can understand, that they can apply to their games, then it still matters for, let's say, your roster. Even how can you communicate it to, the managers, to guys who are making the decisions? An analytics department is not nearly as worthwhile if you can't communicate the ideas that are being generated there,
Well,
right? So
and
just having one for the sake of having one, I don't want to put that as some black mark against the Ducks, but it is still kind of the bare minimum. And so now that you have Dallas Eakins, who at least on the surface seems to believe in these ideas, he is also known as a really good communicator. And so I think that that's the most important thing, is transferring kind of the harder to understand math of it into something that someone who's been in the game forever can understand. Like saying, hey, if we focus in on the slot area, which everyone already knows, we actually have a mathematically much higher chance of winning. When you can put it into a math context, not just, that's what we've always assumed, that has some power, right? You're kind of combining the assumed knowledge with the new knowledge.
Well, and not only having an analytics department that can put together the stats, but somebody that can use those stats in the correct way and create the right concepts, like you're saying, from that, and have the numbers.
You can still get it wrong even if you have analytics. Look at us every podcast.
Even if you have numbers in front of you, that doesn't necessarily mean that they mean anything. It's all about how you interpret them, how you utilize them, the story. At the end of the day, this is kind of how I put it with stats and analytics and numbers. They tell a story, and you got to make sure you're reading that story correctly, because if you're not, then you're giving out poor information. And I think that's what we try to do on here. Not give out poor information. I mean, you know what I mean. Kempafu asks, question, I've watched a lot of the Duck goals games trying to figure out Eakins' style. Do you think there's anyone on this roster now except Perry, because I don't want to hear it, that might not fit into his system?
Well, I think that there was another question in the Twitch chat kind of getting at this, but
I think it was Alex Birch, maybe.
We don't totally know what Dallas Eakins' system will be. I wish someone had asked them at the press conference today. I know it's what I would have asked, but it's, what does a Dallas Eakins team with this roster, what does it look like? What does it look like on the ice? How does it play? That type of thing. And of course, I think my guess would be that Eakins would give the canned answer of, well, you don't come in with a set idea. You kind of work with what you have. I think that he's probably selling himself a little short there, but my expectation would be that this team is more in line with rolling four lines. I think less top-heavy usage. I think that's kind of the first thing you'll notice. The second thing, I do think that it's going to be a bit more up-tempo. I think it's going to be a bit more predicated on the rush, getting rush chances as opposed to working the cycle down low. It's something that we've seen a lot in Anaheim over the years. Thirdly, I think the power play will get better. I mean, it has to, because it was so awful last year. I think it's going to start becoming one-timer friendly, which it definitely wasn't last year. And then to the question of, are there guys who don't fit the system? I actually, and maybe this is to add some fuel to the fire of people who think that Eakins has been the guy all along, is that there aren't really too many guys on this roster, if any almost, who you can say, oh, that guy just doesn't fit, or that guy just totally doesn't make sense. I think that they've laid the table pretty nicely for Dallas Eakins here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, I mean, you look at kind of the way that things were said in this, in the press conference in terms of styles, they kind of more or less laid it out that he likes to play more of an up-tempo style, likes to pressure. I think there was a quote I think it was an Eric Stevens article from Ben Street talking about the F3, that they always like to have an F3 high, being ready to pressure and be able to turn into offense the other way. And basically there may be some turnovers in the neutral zone, but they're trying to really create stuff and get speed through the neutral zone. It's going to be a way more up-tempo style of hockey than we're used to seeing. And I think that that's a very good thing to hear moving forward. Other things that we've heard from our own John Broadbent is that guys have to play hard. And we heard it from Dallas also in his press conference today. And I thought that this was one thing I wanted to mention from the press conference today, that when he first said that I want this team to be hard to play against, I at first started getting very nervous, because in my head,
cold sweats.
Yeah, I started thinking, wait, that doesn't align with what I thought you were here for. Because in my head, when you hear play hard to play against, that means we're going to be physical, we're going to be
cycle team.
Yeah, that whole thing. And then he elaborated on it, and basically he elaborated and said, by hard to play against, I don't necessarily mean that we need to be hitting them every single moment. You can be hard to play against in so many different ways. You can be hard to play against by being skilled and making it hard to play against you because you have all that skill. You can be hard to play against because you're fast. There are multiple different ways, but to make it so the other team does not want to play you. And that is what he meant by hard to play against. And if you're a physical team, then you're hard to play against like that. I see.
And that was the day that Jake Rudolph fell in love all over again.
I mean,
and that was the moment, very moment.
You should have seen my face way back when, 3 or 4 years ago, when he was on Dallas Eakins was on the TSN Hockey Analytics podcast, and he made mention that basically he views stats and he loves them. And granted, as a coach, this is how you should view it, that he values them, but he values them just as much as he values work ethic, as heart, and all those other intangibles. Yeah, that they're all because part of that equation.
Those are the soft variables that go into it.
Yes.
If a guy isn't going to try hard, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Just like it is that he gets caved into his own zone. It all kind of is one and the same.
Yeah. So let's blitz through these couple more questions that we've got. A. Birch had a question. How far do you think Dallas can take this team?
Well, going back to my 20 to 30% number, if you look at where the Ducks were last year, maybe post Carlisle, I think he can turn them into a team that pushes for a playoff spot. I think that they're going to compete. There's still elements of this roster. The Ducks aren't just starting over again. They still have established pieces on their roster. You look at the blue line, I think he's going to lean into that top 3 and maybe try to accentuate Brendan Cooley, with Manson, Lindholm, and Fowler. So I think that, there's still some established guys there. Of course, John Gibson is still there. I am very curious to see what John Gibson's workload looks like next year, given the kind of upgrades that they've made in the sports performance department. And also just, I think Dallas Eakins, I would be shocked if he runs Gibson necessarily into the ground like he did or like Carlisle did last year. Although then again, Kevin Boyle did start back-to-back games coming off an overtime game in the Calder Cup conference final, but that's a different story. And then, so yeah, I think that your expectations should be kind of neutral. I think that if this team isn't very good next year or struggles to find some rhythm, I don't think you should view that as a sign that the experiment has already failed. I think this is a 2-year project. But I think that, kind of best case scenario, I could definitely see them pushing for a playoff spot and even making it. I think that that's just kind of where they are. And if you get another vintage season from John Gibson and he has another fantastic year, then maybe you're looking at more than that. But I think that that's where you should be kind of aligning your expectations.
Yeah, and I think that the hard thing to really predict with this Ducks teams is that the floor to ceiling range for this team is huge.
It's vast.
It's huge. So I think that's the hard thing to predict. I think I think I could see them making the playoffs this year, and you have John Gibson. Who knows what happens after that? I'm not going to say they're a contender for the cup, but I think that they could be in that playoff mix.
They could be a feisty kind of tough out in the first round. I think that's where I see them.
Our good friend George asked, how bad will the growing pains be with the team and Dallas Eakins implementing a new system?
I think that people are overrating how different this will be. Dallas Eakins isn't going to come into a hockey team and say play basketball, right? This is a lot of hockey principles are pretty much the same. I think that we're kind of overselling almost how different this is going to be in a way. It is different from Randy Carlisle, but on the general spectrum of hockey tactics, we're not Dallas Eakins isn't going to reinvent the wheel. I think guys just want structure. So they're going to be, I think, given that from day one with Dallas Eakins.
I think the other issue with Dallas, or with going back to Randy, is you had a coach who really didn't know what he was doing, basically not knowing how to have a team that plays fast. And you had a guy that was trying to make things up as he goes and not really having something to lean back on.
Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Randy.
Yeah, exactly. But Dallas, on the other hand, has had history with being able to play this way. Look at his time with the goals. And so having that success of implementing that type of system, I think that's something better to be able to lean back on. So a couple more questions on Dallas before we start jumping into draft stuff, and then we'll get into more questions after we talk about the draft. But from Twitter, Alex McKay gave us a lot of really good questions, and we may not be able to get to all of them, but I really, really appreciate it. But let's just really quickly start. That says, now that Eakins is confirmed, what does it mean for the assistant coaching situation? Who has any say in the assistants brought on or kept? What would you guys like to see happen? So first part of that, there's been no word. Supposedly it's something that may happen this week. I do not know how much say Eakins will have in the situation, or if Bob Murray's going to have all of the say.
I think that there's going to be one Eakins pick and one Murray pick. That would be my guess.
Yeah.
Just Murray exerting a little power here. And I think that they do want to give Eakins the opportunity to have his best shot at it as possible. And that's going to be, I think, with getting to pick mostly his own staff.
Yeah. And then who's
game? Well, to answer the question, who we would like to see, I would not be shocked if Marty Wilford came back.
Same.
Just because they did have chemistry. They did work together in San Diego. I don't know if Mark Morrison will be back. He seems, I would guess he's gone.
Wasn't he
don't know that for sure, though.
Wasn't Mark Morrison, am I forgetting? I feel like he was on the staff before, and he was
the eye in the sky type coach.
And so I feel like I could see him going back to that.
I'm not saying he's necessarily gone from the entire picture, but as far as on the bench assistant coach, I actually wonder if the Ducks will go to a model we've seen a bit more around the league where there's 3 assistant coaches on the bench. There's kind of your defense and offense, and then there's just kind of your guy who notices stuff. And
wait. Have teams been having 3 guys on the bench?
All right, folks, get your warm Miller Lights out.
Are you sure?
This is where I talk about the Montreal Canadiens. So last season they had 3 assistant coaches on the bench. People. They had Ducharme as kind of the middle guy. They had Kirk Muller. And, I am blanking on the name here. It's really killing me because I have his face in my head. But anyway.
Sorry, folks.
So this is something that teams are doing, and it's to the Canadiens' credit. I think it worked out really well. And Claude Julien talked a lot about how having that extra voice on the bench who's not necessarily as tied to getting line changes going and matchups is just more kind of surveying the play and giving his input. There was actually a lot of positive feedback there, and the players liked it too, as a guy who, again, is not just so tied to the positions. And so I would be curious to see if they go in that direction. I don't know if they would as long as Bob Murray is around, but I think that I would not be surprised if under Dallas Eakins, that would be something that they consider.
Yeah, they definitely could. Alex McKay asks, whose game will benefit the most from Dallas Eakins taking over?
Ooh, that's a really good question. That's a tough one to say. I think that the blue line will actually benefit the most. I guess maybe salary-wise, the forwards will benefit the most because maybe there'll be more offense, more opportunities to produce points. But I think that the defense will actually benefit pretty greatly just from having a better kind of breakout system, having cleaner exits. I think that that's one area of the game that I could see really improving. So I'm going to say that just in terms of quality of life factor, I think it may be the blue liners who actually start enjoying it first.
I'm going to go Andre Kasha.
Oh, so you're going one individual player. Okay. Yeah. Fair. I copped out a little bit. That's fine.
You definitely did. Yeah, I think
I'm known to do.
I think Andre Kasha will. All right. So I think that's kind of covered. We'll probably get into some more questions as we go along and get through the draft, maybe some more on Eakins. But before we start jumping in the draft, we are going to take a short break. And we are back. And so now we're ready to jump into the draft. The draft is this upcoming Friday. And the Ducks, as you all know, have the 9th overall pick. They also have the 29th pick. But I think right now we're going to focus on that 9th pick, because this is the first time the Ducks have had a pick in the top 10. I'm not including the 10th overall pick that Nick Ritchie
That's literally in the top 10.
Fine. So Nick,
it's not the top 9.
So top 9 then, since they drafted Hampus Lindholm in what would that have been, 2013?
Well, Hampus was 6th overall, wasn't he?
Was he 6th?
In 2012?
I may have just.
Dude, how do you not know this stuff?
I may have been all sorts of off right there.
You're in off season mode.
I know, I definitely am.
You're in off. I'm totally kidding. Yeah, he was 6th overall in 2012. Boom, nailed it.
Damn, impressive.
Sicard won. Okay, but let's get into this draft though. I think before we get into the 9th pick, we should talk a little bit about how much variance there's going to be at that slot. So most experts are saying that, and by experts, I mean people who actually follow the draft, not the people like us who pretend to know what we're talking about a week before the draft actually happens, but the people who are out scouting all year, like Corey Proman at The Athletic. Basically, it's a 2-player draft at the very top, right? So we all know that it's going to be Hughes and Kako. I think that the noise that Kako may go first has died down. It's going to be Hughes and Kako.
Yeah.
And then from there, there's a decent sense of what it's going to be at 3 and 4, but it's pretty wide open. So just some names that I'll throw out here. I'll just go through the top 5. Alex Turcotte, center from the U.S. National Team Development Program, slated to go number 3, or at least predicted to go number 3, from the combination of Pronman and the Chicago Blackhawks beat writer Scott Powers. I guess a successor to Jonathan Toews, another high-quality forward. Dylan Cousins, a guy that we kind of talked about going to Anaheim all season when we thought that they may have a higher pick, just kind of a taller, kind of steadier, NHL-ready maybe type center. That would be 4th overall to Colorado, expected. And then 5th, this is one that I don't know if I agree with, but Bowen Byram to the LA Kings, supposedly a very dynamic puck-moving defenseman, kind of in the vein of Drew Doughty a little bit, who could be going 5th to LA. But again, this is at that point you're already just completely speculating, because I could also very well see Chicago wanting a defenseman. The general feel around this draft, outside of top 2, is that it's going to be a lot of drafting on need. But people usually interpret that as a bad thing, but there's actually a pretty good group of, I would say, equally, or at least you can say they're equally skilled forwards or players, to where you can kind of draft for need, because the talent, the upside is kind of in some form or fashion even across that top 9, like you were mentioning.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's kind of where you have to be as a Ducks fan, is that you
just have no idea.
Yeah, pretty. And it's really funny because you look at basically a lot of different projections. You look at Corey Pronman, you look at, I believe that Bob McKenzie put out his mock draft also, or not his mock draft, his rankings. And his rankings are a little bit different than everyone else also. And basically, I think the only 2 things that I've seen as being set is that 3-4 on pretty much everyone's list are Turcotte or Bowen Byram. That's pretty much set. But the thing is, it really depends on how different teams view getting a defenseman that high. And maybe Byram slips, maybe he goes high, and maybe some team really wants to get a defenseman with that high pick and they go after Philip Broberg instead. But I think there's a group of 7 players in Byram, Turcotte, Dach, Cousins, Zegras, Caulfield, and Peyton Krebs that are all kind of in that range of players that will help out the Ducks, some more than others. Obviously, they're not all the same. I think that Turcotte and Byram are kind of the 2 that stand out above that, and that's why they're ranked higher. But you'll see, I've seen Dach at 5. I've also seen Dach at 10. And so it's really interesting to see the highs and the lows. I think running through the different guys, I think personally the one I like the most would be probably Trevor Zegras.
Boom, I guessed it.
I think the reason why is he's, I think, the most fun.
He seems very dynamic, high-end offensive
very dynamic.
skill.
He's a guy that is very big into kind of improvisation. And you look at a lot of his plays, there are a lot of behind the back, a lot of fun, interesting type plays, things that aren't very normal. You can tell that he really thinks the game at a high level. And so he's the guy that, I mean, the U.S. National Development Program really had some good players this year with Jack Hughes, especially down the middle. Jack Hughes, Trevor Zegras, and Alex Turcotte all on that team. And so everyone kind of said, so Turcotte was kind of more so the 2-way center for that team. Jonathan Toews that could do it all offensively and defensively. Jack Hughes was kind of in the Connor McDavid role. Very, very flashy player, very fast, can attack on all levels. But everyone kind of said Zegras was the one who was the playmaker. He was the one who would dish the puck, and he could become the power play quarterback moving forward. And so that's a guy that I think I could realistically see slipping to 9. I don't see Turcotte doing that, and I think that that's a player that could really help out this team. You also look at a guy like a Kirby Dach, who's known as kind of like a Ryan Getzlaf light, a little bit faster than Getzlaf, and so maybe if he slips to where to 9, because if you look at his stats, his overall point production was not that great this past season. And so that's kind of been a bit of a knock. He started out really hot and had a little bit of a slow middle to the season, so that made him drop off a little bit. And I think Dylan Cousins, I think he was compared to Matthew Barzal at one point. Cole Caulfield's really kind of an interesting name in all of this.
He could slide very far down. Well, let me ask you this before we kind of go further.
Yes.
So there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about teams drafting for need. Do you see the Ducks going with a forward or with a defenseman? My own opinion is I think we will see them draft a center, but do you have an opinion on if they go for us, if they target a specific position or not? Because there's an argument to be made for pretty much both sides. I mean, the Ducks have gone from one of the deepest prospect pools on the back end in recent years to now one of the shallowest, but they've also gone to one of the deepest forward pools. So my own opinion here is that I think it's more valuable to have a lot of really good forwards, especially if you can get a really good center. That's mostly what drives success. Obviously, you need a stable blue line, but the Ducks kind of have that for the foreseeable future. And so, using their first pick on a high-end defenseman, there may not even be that many of those guys after Byram, or at least sure values after Byram. So where do you kind of fall on that? Do you see them going blue line or up front?
Well, I think you always have to go best player available. I don't think
Here we go.
What?
No, nothing. Just the philosophical hard line.
I think you go best player available always because you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by drafting for need. And I think that you look at the Ducks forward situation, and yes, they do have a lot of forwards, a lot of youth. They have guys like Sam Steele, but I think as we talk about that, they have a really good prospect system at forward, but do they have that top end talent? Probably not.
Right. They probably need another bite at the apple. Basically.
And
another guy who could potentially become that.
And I think along those same lines, I love the Ducks blue line. If this top 10 was all defensemen, I would say you probably should take the best player available. And I think along those lines, the one thing that makes me a bit nervous is the Ducks overthink this a bit too much and really reach and go for Philip Broberg with that 9th overall pick. Because, I mean, you look at the highlights of him, he's basically kind of like a Hampus Lindholm clone, except he's a little bit more of a smooth skater also. He's not going to be a top point producer though from the blue line, but he's going to be a top pairing defenseman probably eventually. But from everything I've kind of read and everything I've kind of seen, he shouldn't be in that top 10 range. He's a guy that more sits in that 10 to 15 range, and these with the talent that's available at forward, I think you'd be kicking yourself, 10 years down the line for not taking one of these guys. And I think that's where I'm at. And I think I'd prefer it to be a center, but I think you look at the group. And so you have, I'm going to exclude Turcotte and Byram because they're both going to go. They're not going to slip, I think. But you have Zegras, a center, Cousins, a center, Dach, a center. Peyton Krebs, also a center. And then you have Cole Caulfield, who's a winger. But Caulfield could be a winger that is going to be an influential winger moving forward. So even the winger in that group of 5 players that the Ducks could be looking at, or should be looking at, these are all guys that could become difference makers moving forward. Even the one that is a winger. He put up, 72 goals? Is that what it was?
He scored a lot of goals. Him and Cole Caulfield scored a lot of goals.
I'm talking about Caulfield.
Oh, sorry. I was reading. But yeah, both Zegras and Caulfield both scored a bunch of goals. But yeah, I mean, Caulfield, the one caveat there is that he did get to play with Jack Hughes.
True.
And so it's kind of hard to separate those two. It's interesting because on Broberg, Corey Pronman had him going 8th in his own rankings of the draft. And so, or not necessarily of his own rankings, but just where he sees guys falling.
And he also has Broberg, if you, on the most recent, I'm spacing on the name of it, the Custins podcast. I can't think of the name of it, but on the most recent one where Custins had, I
think he had him go to the Ducks, did he?
Yeah, he had Broberg to the Ducks.
There you go. Well, it sounds like he has the talent to justify that spot. It's just he may be a couple years away. But I do think that with this draft, for the Ducks specifically, I think that they're in an interesting spot where you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, where I do think that they are going to draft for need, but I also think that their need is adequately addressed by the players that will be available at that spot. True. I think that it's going to be centers. They're all going to be really good. And I think that I think that the Ducks need to start really building out that center line, because Ryan Getzlaf has 2 years left in his contract. And after that, you have Adam Henrique, and who knows how long he'll be around.
Yeah.
I'm starting to think he'll be around probably for another year. I don't know if he'll get traded this summer, but then you have Sam Steele. And Sam Steele alone is not going to get you there to kind of have that next wave. He's not really a top talent like any of these guys that they would draft at this spot would be. And then you have Isaac Lundestrom, who at 23 overall last summer, you're just happy if he kind of makes it to the NHL. To be quite frank, it sounds like he will do that, but the expected value of 23rd pick is not nearly as high as 9th overall. So the Ducks need a center who's kind of a surefire bet, who's not surefire as you can be in the NHL as a draft pick outside of the top 5, a guy who's going to bring a high degree of skill. And to me, that's why I actually agree with you that I think Zegras makes the most sense out of all of that. A guy who's got the upside, who's got the skill, and I think who can just kind of take pressure off those other guys too. The Lundestroms and the Steels.
And I think realistically, I could see him slipping to the Ducks, because you look at the guys that will be available. Like we said, Kakko, Hughes are going to go 1 and 2. 3 and 4 are probably going to be Turcotte and Byram. Some combination there.
How do you feel about Colorado getting Byram, by the way?
I mean,
another D-man.
I think that's not a bad thing for them. That's very much not a bad thing.
It's not, but we also saw what they looked like when Nathan McKinnon wasn't on the ice this playoff. I don't know. I think they're in an interesting spot where on one hand you can argue they should probably get another D-man to go with their youth, but then another forward also sounds really great.
Maybe Byram goes to Chicago and then Turcotte's available for Colorado.
I think Chicago should get Byram. I know we're totally going off track here, but I think I know Turcotte makes sense for them, but they are just people like their D prospects, but I think you need more lottery tickets back there.
I could kind of see the Kings going for Dach, to be honest. I think the big body type of center. I don't know if I could see them going for Caulfield. I feel like Rob Blake would not want to take the risk of a guy that's 5'7".
Yeah. Well, it sounds like they're being linked to Cousins and Dach, which I guess kind of makes sense because they built their. Can you call it a dynasty? 2 Stanley Cups? It's not really a dynasty.
No.
Three cups
count as a dynasty.
They built their run off of Anze Kopitar, basically a strong, sturdy playmaking center, and so it is quite possible that Dach and Cousins are one of those two are going to be the guy at that spot. So again, to your point, the Ducks, it's going to be really interesting to see who's even available at 9 at that point, because it's such a wide open draft.
And the Ducks, this kind of sucks to look at it like this, but it's kind of a decent thing for the Ducks because pretty much everyone's going to make the decision for them for who to take.
Yeah. Yeah, they're everyone's saying that the best pick in the draft is number 3, because you basically get your first, because you know who's going to get Hughes and Kakko, and you basically get to pick your guy out of that pile of the 7 or so.
Yeah,
you get to just have your guy and not worry about it. But on the flip side, to what you were just saying, the Ducks are going to be able to have everyone else kind of decide for them who they're going to have available.
Yeah.
But what I will say though is that I think whoever they get is probably going to be a pretty good player.
Yeah,
that's what it's looking like here.
Agreed. And I think the only thing I do want to make mention of, because probably someone will mention this at some point if we don't bring this up, Peyton Krebs did tear his Achilles, or partially tear his Achilles. No, everyone's prominence basically come out and said that shouldn't affect his draft status. He's going to be able to make a full recovery, and I think that logically makes sense. I don't see him really dropping. Maybe he drops outside of the top 10, and maybe, the other thing to think about is we've pegged these 7 guys as being in that draft spot, but there's a chance that someone from outside of that group of 7 jumps up and some team goes off the board. That always happens. A player that was projected to go in the late teens to early 20s ends up jumping up and becoming a top 5 pick or top 10 pick. And so that could happen and make 2 guys available for the Ducks out of this group of players. So there's a lot out there. The interesting name is definitely Cole Caulfield, though. If he can somehow slip,
he's going to slide. I think he's going to slide big time.
Because of his size?
I just think that if you look at the teams that are kind of lined up here, I think that none of them, I think, see themselves as positioned to take a flyer on a guy. And I think that's what Caulfield, I'm not saying that's what he is, but I think that that's what teams kind of view him as, because Chicago, they don't want to just sit out the rest of Kane and Taves. I'm not going to call it prime, but basically the remainder of their careers. Colorado's a playoff team. LA is completely unpredictable, so maybe they pick him. Detroit, I mean, I think that they need something positive next year, and I don't know if Caulfield is going to be that. He might not even be in the NHL next year. Buffalo wants to make the playoffs. Edmonton wants to make the playoffs.
I could see Buffalo getting Caulfield.
Yeah, I mean, again, everything is in play. I don't know. Everything is in play. But
honestly,
I see teams playing it safe in the top 10.
Caulfield screams Chicago to me, and I'm curious if Chicago looks to move down in the draft.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the third pick is available. That's what we're kind of hearing. And I don't know if that's what I would do if I were them. I would just make my pick and take my seat.
If you're the Ducks, do you try to make an offer for that third overall pick if you really like Turcotte?
I think it's going to cost them too much.
I agree.
I think too much is a relative term. It depends on your opinion of a Sam Steele or a Troy Terry, but I think that's where the conversation kind of starts.
Probably.
And I don't think they're willing to pay that price.
Yeah, and I would agree that that's probably not the right price to pay there. I think you take your pick. But so out of the group of players I foresee in the Ducks range, it's going to be those five. Like I said, Caulfield, Zegras, Cousins, Dach, Krebs. Yeah.
Did we see a Corey Perry trade on draft night?
Ooh. I mean, all the GMs are in the same room. That always leads to trade.
They are.
I don't know. You kind of wonder that.
Are we going to see a Corey Perry trade, period? I think is the question I'm starting to ask, but that's neither here nor there.
Is it going to have to go to a buyout? I don't know. It's
I think
interesting.
It may.
You kind of said this already. Which out of this group of player intrigues you the most to see on the Ducks?
Vasily Podkolzin.
All right, we know that's not happening.
The Ducks don't draft Russians, and although Podkolzin is rated as one of the most talented players in this entire draft, the Russian factor is kind of scaring some people off.
Huge.
So he's projected right now at, in the teens, which is not, I think, what I would have expected if you had asked me this a year ago, but here we are. Who would I like to see? I think this is just kind of going with everything I've said about the Ducks lately. I just want to see an upside play. I don't want to see a safe pick. I want to see, if it is a Caulfield, I would totally sign off on that because you're just betting on the upside.
Yeah.
And, they have enough talent. I'm not saying that they can withstand a bust because I think that Caulfield does have enough of a floor that you can feel comfortable with. He can still supplement the current core that they have. So I'm not saying I want to see Caulfield necessarily, but I do want to see one of these guys who's a little less on the safe side and more of a guy who could have a real shot at being a difference maker in the NHL, which is hard to do with the ninth overall pick.
And they've had their drafts recently, and they've hit pretty decently and gotten some really good players. They're I wouldn't say safe plays. I think Lundestrom was kind of a safe play, but I think now is the time to cash in and really kind of make that high risk play. And if that is getting Cole Caulfield, then that's the pick that you need to make. The thing that worries me is that the Ducks may be too old school of an organization to look at a player that's 5'6" and think that they should take him.
I don't think that's who they are in the draft, though. I think that there's this big disparity between the Ducks as they are within the NHL and the Ducks as they draft. Because the Ducks drafted Sam Steele.
That's true.
Who is a smaller, obviously it's a much later pick.
He's not 5'6" either. 5'7".
He's not. But the point being, I think that the Ducks scouting staff is a bit more open to maybe a smaller player or just a more skilled player than you might assume they would be. It's actually the most interesting thing is that we all assume Bob Murray is this really old school coach or old school GM. But if you look at the drafting record under him, there's been a lot of really good picks, and there's been a lot of picks that people around the league who are more kind of, I hate using the term forward thinking, but who are more just minded towards skill, towards speed, that type of thing, they've signed off on. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't think that they're too old school to do it.
Corey Pronman, just kind of for those of you out there, I'm looking at the article he wrote, but basically he said he's one of the best goal scorers to be eligible for the draft in recent years.
He gave him an 80 out of 80 on the shot chart.
Yeah.
Basically on his scale of 20 to 80.
Yeah. I mean, he had this line, you're going to be shocked by the assertion that I believe a 72 goal scorer has a pretty good shot. So
right. We'll have to see.
Yeah, so I think we've kind of been able to talk a little bit of those different guys that are available. I think Caulfield is the most intriguing. I think Zegras is the guy I'd like to see most. I think the Ducks are kind of in a situation, though, like I said, where other teams are going to be making the decision for them. And it's good and bad in that situation. So
they're going to have basically seven different contingency plans.
Yeah.
Actually, probably more than that mathematically, but yeah. So it's going to be interesting.
Oh, I was just going to say, as for the later, the 29th overall pick, I think there's just so much at play with later.
We haven't even talked about that yet. Yeah.
With later draft picks that it's very hard. I mean, I would have never guessed Isaac Lundestrom last year. So
no.
I think it's better to kind of look at, I think when you hit that point, maybe you draft for need over best available when you hit that late in the first. But so maybe
I think there's so many different ways you could look at it, because you could argue your top pick, you want to get the sure value, and then later on you just take you just take Hail Mary, you throw Hail Marys out. So I don't know.
I could see the Ducks looking for a defenseman though to fill up that role, and our good friend, I
think we will see them drafting some defensemen for sure.
John Broadbent's throwing out Zegras, Heinola, Soderstrom. One of those three are who he's pegging. And go check out John Broadbent's written a bunch of articles for our website. Really good breakdowns of every kind of different draft eligible prospects the Ducks could be looking at. So go take a look at those.
Yeah, absolutely. What if the Ducks drafted Cam York at 9th overall?
I really don't know.
Orange County native, and he's named Cam, and he's a defenseman. He's actually projected to go to Montreal, 15th overall right now. I would be in favor of that. We get the better Cam,
who's also a defenseman.
Yes.
Here, let's go with this. Do you think, before we move on and people start throwing some questions into,
well, we should probably start wrapping up here, because we're closing in on an hour.
We're giving people a megapod though
we're going megapod
for the Eakins news and for the draft. So
it's a megapod. I'm here for it.
Anyone with questions, throw them in the Twitch chat about the draft.
Let's go mega.
About anything, about everything, and we'll try to get to them. But do you think it's more likely the Ducks take one of those 5 players or someone off the board?
We're talking about the 9th pick,
not the
29th. I think it's more likely they take one of those 5. I don't see them kind of reaching down into the next tier, I guess you could call it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see them getting a Podkolzin. Definitely don't see that. I don't see them getting a Soderstrom. Maybe, I don't see them getting Matthew Boldy, just because I think he's a winger, and they already have so many wingers. I think that they're going to get one of these guys. I don't know. Maybe I'm just totally off here, but if you look at who's kind of projected after that, and there's not a lot of centers, or at least not a lot of centers that I think that have that higher floor. So to me, it's probably going to be one of these guys. The draft is really distinctly broken up into 3 tiers, maybe even 4 levels in the first round, but it's the top 2, that kind of group of, let's call it 7 or 8, and then just this kind of big kind of third tier where it's just a bunch of maybe there's within that third tier there's an upper tranche. I'm just running out of words here. I think Podkolzin and Broberg are maybe on the higher end of that, but then after that it just looks like and Boldy, they just look like a total crapshoot to me.
Yeah, completely agreed there. How far do you think Podkolzin slips?
I think he's within reasonable range right now. I think he'll be in the teens. I could see him. What I don't understand is why Corey Pronman has Podkolzin going 12th to the Wild, even if that's where he sees him skill-wise or overall.
Paul Fenton.
Well, it's the Kirill Kaprizov debacle where he still hasn't come over yet from the KHL.
Fair.
So I think I would be shocked if he went past 15. I think the talent is it's too high. What I am really shocked by is how highly ranked Spencer Knight is. For those who don't know, goaltender for the U.S. National Team Development Program. Very rare nowadays that you see a goaltender ranked this highly. Parman has him ranked 16th going to Colorado. I don't see that happening at all. I mean, even though Colorado needs help in net, that would be a bold pick, almost too bold. Even if Spencer Knight is projected to be one of the best goalie prospects we've seen in a while, you're probably not going to see him in the NHL for a couple of years, if not 3 years.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense.
Don't take a goalie with a first round pick.
Don't draft goalies. Just don't do it.
Don't draft them with first round picks is my rule of thumb. Second round picks, fine.
Yeah.
Ducks got Gibson in the second round.
Third, fourth, that's fine.
There's just too much at play, too many unknowns,
but
too many
Colorado
things going
has 2 picks in the first round. This would be with their 16th pick. And this is where the intrigue
I
begins.
guess, yeah, if you have 3 picks, why not?
1 home run swing, 1 safe play.
Yeah,
I don't
know.
I still would not do it. I would just get 2 really good players.
Yeah.
Or at least just not a goalie. Anything but a goalie. It's just so hard to say. Need I introduce you or remind you to Rick DiPietro?
Mm-hmm. But on the same other side of the coin, John Gibson. Second round pick, but still.
Second round. Yeah, I mean, but even then, second round, I would have to check. But
Carey Price?
Yeah, Carey Price worked out really well for the Canadiens.
Fifth overall, right?
5th overall, 2005. But it took a few years. I mean, he was good right away, then kind of stalled and stuttered. So, I don't know. It's inadvisable. In a game of low probabilities, why make your probability even lower? Unless you want to use the argument that, well, the probability is already low anyway, so who cares? True. I don't know. I think that I'd rather build up my stable of skaters when I know that there's kind of an expected value as opposed to taking this really just pot shot at a goalie. I don't know.
Yeah.
Plus, goalies end up being too expensive. That's another problem.
All right, so let's jump into some of these questions. Alex McKay sent us a bunch, so I wanted to try to get into some of them. Basically, he mentioned if Perry and D gets moved out, who is Eakins? Oh, that's going to be such a struggle for me this year. Who is Eakins likely to select for his player leadership team? Is there any chance at all Getzlaf is not captain come October? I'd say the chances are very slim. I'd say it's most likely probably going to be Fowler and probably going to be Henrique,
yeah,
as the 2 assistants. And who do you think the Ducks are going to target for a right shot defenseman?
Well, I was going to say, just in regards to the leadership angle, I think that, if you're Dallas Eakins, if you've learned something from your Edmonton days, it's that you don't just walk into a new environment and just totally flip everything on its head. And if you go to Ryan Getzlaf and say, we need you to take off the C, I don't think he'd be going at it alone, but that doesn't seem wise. You maybe don't lose the trust of your veterans right away, but the goodwill probably evaporates a little sooner when some losses start piling up. Who do I see them targeting for that third pairing right shot D? Well, I can tell you one thing. It won't be Erik Karlsson, who shockingly re-signed with the Sharks today. I don't know if we'll get into that very much here, but
probably not too much.
There's been a lot of talk of Anton Strawman for that third pairing.
That's the person I was going to mention.
I personally don't really see it. He hasn't been as good, I think, as his reputation kind of would suggest the last couple of years. So I would probably be looking elsewhere. And another name that the Ducks not have been linked to, but have been people have been hoping that they target, Jacob Trouba, has also been traded today. So I don't know. I mean, I would have to kind of look at the free agent market. Maybe Strawman isn't that bad of a pick, I guess, if you're asking him to just be a third pairing guy who can kind of shepherd along Jacob Larson.
And that's
you could
kind of
probably
what I think.
Do worse. You may have to pay him. I feel like you may have to pay him a little too much, though, for what he's probably worth at this point in his career.
I don't think you're going to have to pay him that much, to be honest.
The Ducks also do have cap space, which is another consideration.
Yeah,
there,
especially
if they have to overpay him a little bit, it's not the end of the world.
Especially once they eventually move on from Perry. I think you can. I think you can overpay, but I think you really gotta be wary about giving term to Strawman. I think you try to keep it to 2 years max.
Well, Bob Murray and right shot defenseman on the wrong side of 30.
Yeah.
never gone wrong there in
No.
terms of contract length.
Definitely have not. But looking at his numbers over the past couple of years, last year was below 50% Corsi for percentage. But season before above 50%, season before that above 50%. Consistently above 50%, but granted last year was not. I don't know how much was injury related because he only played 47 games. There's a whole lot of factors at play, but I think that he can be a decent person that you bring in to play third pairing minutes. And yeah, Dan Elder brings up he's left-handed, but what about Alex Edler? He's not
just
signing.
To your point here, Jake, quickly, just because I feel like this is somewhat worth butting into your point here, but he's been over 50%, but he's also been minus relative to his team the last 3 years. So kind of benefiting from that Tampa Bay ecosystem. Again, I'm just maybe a little lower on him than you are, but I think his age 32 season may be a bit of a sign of things to come for his next few seasons here. I don't know. If he barely plays, if they just write out the top 4, maybe it works, but I don't know if that's what they'd be bringing him in to do necessarily.
Yeah. Yep.
What about Dion Phaneuf? He's a free agent.
Oh God, George brought this up in our Twitch chat, and I was going to mention it, but
it also looks like it's not going to happen between the Canucks and Alex Edler.
Yeah.
Does he really have a spot on the Ducks though? Given that he's probably going to be a third pairing guy.
Maybe.
I mean, I think he would be a better option clearly than Anton Stralman. He would also probably cost more.
Yeah,
and so that's another consideration.
Like I said, keep the term down. You can give him money. Keep the term down. That's kind of what you need to realize with these types of deals. You don't want them to handcuff you moving forward. So what about Tyler Myers? Piggy 7 Swap in our Twitch chat brought that up.
I just think that there are names that are being thrown around because they're just
they're names.
They're literally just names. I mean, I really think that's what that comes down to. I mean, Anton Stralman, Tyler Myers. Let's do it. I really don't see the Ducks
or Schuster last year.
I don't see the Ducks getting any of those guys. I think if we've learned anything from how Bob Murray treats his third pairing, that is not where he's going to spend his money. That is not where he's going to bring in a name, especially because the Ducks, as much as we give them some grief for their defensive play, they are pretty set in their top 4. We'll see what happens with Brendan Gooley. If maybe the Ducks want to bring in a second pairing right-handed shot. I mean, that's something that we haven't really considered here.
Yeah.
But are they really married to the idea that Brendan Gooley will be a second pairing guy while Cam Fowler is on his off wing? That doesn't seem like something that, especially a guy like Dallas Eakins, would necessarily want. Like you don't have the right to left synergy. So maybe they actually, a guy who I actually think could make a little sense would be Ben Lovejoy for the third pairing. Again, another name.
Bring him back. Bring him back.
But he's good. I think he's actually decent. He's also one of the few guys who's ever actually been good with Cam Fowler. So reunite those two at age 35 for Ben Lovejoy and see how it goes.
Yeah, fair.
As Jake texts.
Yeah.
I guess this podcast isn't important.
No, definitely not.
Duly noted. Duly noted.
Yeah. Dude, let me ask you this question. Our good friend John Brabant said, now that Winnipeg has their pick back, who do you think they're going to take at 20th overall?
Ooh, wow. That is a good question that I am uniquely unqualified to answer. Why not Raphael Lavoie?
Yeah,
Boom.
Maybe.
I mean, now that they have their pick back, I could see them probably trying to insert another forward. That being said, they also need help they're kind of in a weird spot. They kind of need help everywhere. And so I could see them either going for a high-end skill guy, maybe to kind of foreshadow Patrick Laine being traded, or they go for some blue line help. And so where does that leave you at 20th overall? I mean, another guy that there's been some talk about is maybe a high upside guy, Bobby Brink, right now projected 22nd overall. So I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to be a draft expert because I've, done a little research here, but that's what I could see.
Yep. And then Lewis asked us, here's just a very off-topic question, but it works. What was the most heartbreaking loss you have experienced as a sports fan in any sport?
I think this is a trap question.
Why?
This is definitely a trap because I know that Lewis is a Warriors fan. And so he's trying to get this out of me. Honestly, the most heartbreaking loss, it's starting to become Game 6, Golden State versus Toronto. Resulted in some catastrophic injuries. But if we're looking at hockey, the most devastating loss, I don't know if I really have one, to be quite honest. I was pretty crushed when Montreal lost in New York in the Eastern Conference Final in 2014. I felt like they actually had a chance to win it all, and they didn't. So, I don't know, maybe that's my most crushing one. What about you? I mean, you've certainly had your fair share with the Ducks the last year or so.
I think the most crushing one might be Tottenham losing the Champions League final.
Are you kidding me?
That was so sad. I was so sad.
Okay, pick a hockey one. Pick a hockey one.
All right, hockey one. Let's go with the Chicago.
We should be giving a hockey
the
one.
Chicago Game 7 loss.
That was tough, especially because Frederik Andersen turned into a pumpkin. That was probably the biggest problem in that game. It's weird because that's how we'll remember that game, but it probably wasn't just his fault. It's just how the history books are being written.
Yep.
Okay,
So,
any more questions, or
nope.
Is the Megapod losing a little steam?
I think the Megapod's lost a little bit of steam. We've gone 130. I think.
Oh, another heartbreaking loss that I just thought of. 49ers Seahawks. What is it? Conference final in football? Jeez. NFC Championship game. I forget which year, 2014, where Richard Sherman tipped the final pass going to Michael Crabtree and then walked up to the camera and just basically was talking smack on air. That's probably maybe the most embarrassing one of all time, just because you immediately have the opponent rub it into your face. So, yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
Anything else? Let's keep the mega vibes going. I want to keep them going. I want to keep the good times rolling.
Okay.
Let's talk about some NHL news. We actually have legitimate stuff to talk about.
Okay.
Well, let's go through this quickly. Erik Karlsson.
Yes.
Resigns a mega maximum extension of 8 years with San Jose at an AAV of 11.5.
Yeah.
Thoughts? Do you have thoughts? Do you have takes?
My first thought was what I texted you this morning when I woke up at 7 a.m. Had a text message from you saying this is what happens, people. Erik Karlsson, 8 years times 11. This was 7 a.m. And my response was bye Pavelski.
Yeah. I think Doug Wilson was asked today about that, and he was very non-committal.
Yeah.
So
Pavelski's gone. There's no way he's staying with that $11 million being committed.
And the reports that he's testing free agency, I think all roads lead to that being an issue.
I think it's a good deal. I think really, as long as the Sharks are comfortable with his with kind of how his injury history has been, with how he's aging. I mean, he's one of the best defensemen in the game. Maybe they might come to regret this contract a few years down the line, but I think he's one of the best defensemen in the league. And if you have a chance to keep him long term, they took their shot, and they're going to lose their captain, but I don't know if
they can make it work.
I don't know if you really want to have that Pavelski. That Pavelski
exactly.
Next contract on your books. John throwing in our chat, plot twist, Pavelski goes to Vegas. That'd be hilarious. Vegas has no cap space to make that work.
Vegas just wants all the old guys.
Vegas has no cap space for any of that.
They can't make that happen.
So I think San Jose is going to have to navigate some interesting waters this summer to be able to make this work. Maybe Joe Thornton also goes away and retires. There's a whole lot of navigating that they're going to have to do, but I think their blue line's now set for years. And so they're going to be a real tough team to deal with moving forward.
Jacob Trouba to New York for the pick that they had just gotten in the Kevin Hayes trade, and a no-name prospect, or probably a guy that I should have heard of by now, but doesn't seem very important.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. Jacob Trouba's good. They basically just got him for nothing.
Big win for the Rangers. Neil Pionk. What was it? Neil Pionk, a first-round pick, and
something that didn't matter enough for us to remember.
Yeah, you kind of wonder, could the Ducks have put something like this together? 29 plus Mahura. And
this is where overvaluing your prospects gets dangerous.
Is that me overvaluing Mahura?
Yeah.
Okay, fair.
Because Jacob Trouba is already what you hope Josh Mahura becomes.
No, but I'm comparing him to Pionk, not Trouba.
Oh. Well, no, I think that what you're saying is fair, because it's kind of, that would be the Ducks' version of that. Yeah. They don't really have a high-profile D prospect to offer anymore.
Yeah.
and they've traded them all
Yeah.
or lost them for silly reasons.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where they are.
Yep.
Anyway, I love it for the Rangers.
Yeah, I think it's a really good deal for the Rangers. I mean, the Jets got a whole lot less back than they would have gotten if some team would have offer sheeted him.
That Kevin Hayes deal, I guess, is looking better for them because at least they kept their first. But it's just kind of an odd one. Just a very odd one.
The thing that comes out to me on this is, I mean, how much do we think that Jacob Trouba is gonna get on this deal?
He could get a decent chunk. I mean, I think the projections have him. Is it 7 range, 6 range, something like that?
I'm trying to really look really quickly at what. So if he were to be in the $7 million range, the Jets would get a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a third-round pick.
Oh, geez. Oh, that's if he were offer sheeted?
That's if he were offer sheeted. Is that more? Okay. Is that more value or less value than they got?
Well, then they would have to hope that he would be offer sheeted, which I feel like you're relying on something that's very unlikely to happen. They're basically ensuring they get value by trading him here. Well, I mean, I don't think it's a bad trade for the Jets. I just think that the Rangers did really, really well here.
Well, the Rangers are kind of the model that you kind of hope the Ducks look at. I mean, they're a team that really committed to the rebuild. I don't think the Ducks need to commit as hard. I think there are better pieces on the Ducks than there were on the Rangers when they started doing this. But, I mean, very quickly, they've kind of shifted. They've brought in a whole lot of really good pieces, and now they're adding Jacob Trouba to that mix, and they're adding Kakko to that mix also. Like, they're going to be good next year.
And, so per Evolving Wild, Trouba projected at 5 times 7.3.
Yeah.
So he's going to get paid.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny. The conversation this past year and the years before is, should Lundqvist look to move elsewhere to try to win a cup?
Now it's no.
Yeah, now it's maybe
keep him there.
Not. I mean,
well, that's why you wait it out.
And they're the prime example of how you rebuild a team and really kind of retool and get them kind of moving in the right direction after years of competing. And they did it in 2 seasons. 2 non-playoff years.
And they did it not just. I mean, they obviously got very lucky to get the 2nd overall pick.
Yes,
I mean that you can't predict for that to happen, especially with the way that the odds have been flattened out. But hey, when you choose this route, you're at least exposing yourself to that upside.
Yep.
And that's what they're kind of doing here. I mean, they're not going to be contenders next season, but they're going to be at least interesting to watch. Again, there's value in just being interesting, just being fun to watch, generating a little excitement. That's kind of it's an entertainment product. By the way, now that we're totally wrapping up here, Alex Trebek is going to host the NHL Awards.
Not host. I think he's going to be there presenting something. Keenan Thompson's hosting.
Presenting. Well, that's a positive, a big positive.
Yes,
I'm a
very
fan
much
of that.
so.
I'm a big fan of that.
Final question for you. This comes from me. Do the Ducks make a big trade this week?
What are we qualifying as big?
Major player on the team moving out, excluding Perry. Excluding Perry.
Okay, I was gonna ask. Oh man, my instinct tells me no.
Yes.
I've softened my position a little bit on that.
I'm gonna say yes.
I don't think so. I think they should consider it, of course, because I'm Team Chaos. But I don't see it happening. I think that enough things have happened now to where they're going to hold on to their veterans and just kind of lock those guys in because there's going to be a lot of players on this team next season who don't have very much NHL experience. So that's going to be an interesting balancing act for them. I'm curious to see if they bring in any free agent forwards.
I'm going with yes.
And I think so. I think you're going to see.
Oh no, sorry, I'm going with yes that they're making a trade. Sorry.
Really? Well, who's getting traded, Jake? Now you gotta say, you can't just throw that out there. That's not fair.
Hey, it was a yes or no question. I said yes, you said no.
Well, so after having said yes, who could you see being in that? Henrique?
I don't know.
Do all roads lead to Henrique?
I think it does. I think it depends on what they want to do down the center.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be thin at center no matter what next year, in my opinion. So you might as well just say screw it. But what are they going to trade for though? That's what I don't understand. Just a bunch of futures, help on D. I mean, it just feels like you're you're addressing one weakness by creating another one. So I don't know. I have no idea. It's going to be fun. We're going to wrap up here, folks. Thanks a lot for listening today. This was a megapod.
Yes. We should also mention next non-Patreon pod, because we're going to try to get a Patreon pod in, I think, this week. We will not have draft coverage on Friday or Saturday, but I believe our plan is to have a podcast for all of you on Sunday afternoon. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Felix, but I think that's our plan as of right now.
We'll go with that.
Apologies for not giving you coverage on that day. I have a wedding on Sunday that I am in, so a little bit busy.
Texting during the pod, going to weddings. What happened to you?
Just letting you down all the time.
Okay. Well, hey, guys, thanks a lot for listening. This has been a fun one. We try to give you the most we could here, given that it's been a little quiet on our end. But as always, you know the drill. If you've been enjoying the show, make sure to leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Definitely helps the show keep growing, helps more people, more Ducks fans get to enjoy what we have to offer. And additionally, as a reminder, when we do these podcasts, we are going to live stream on Twitch. So make sure to check that out at twitch.tv/ACPod. Make sure to support the podcast over at patreon.com/ACPod. And you're not just supporting us financially, you're actually getting more content. So for $5 a month, you get 2 bonus episodes. Right now, we're basically previewing the off season, which we should probably get into a bit more hurry mode there, just because the moves are being made. And then in addition to that, you also get access to our subscriber or supporter only chat.
Yeah.
And that's going to be through Discord. There's so many things to remember here. Through our Discord chat. That's a lot of fun. It was hopping over the weekend as we started getting reports that Eakins was happening. But that's also available to you at the $1 tier. So honestly, for $1 a month or $5 a month, we'd really appreciate it. We don't do this because we're getting rich off it. We enjoy it, but there are some costs we have to incur, and anything really helps here. And to everyone who's been supporting us, of course, a big thank you. Now, all this being said, it's not possible without AnaheimCalling.com, so make sure to go check that out. We've got a ton of content up there right now. I've got an article up there talking about the Eakins hiring, so make sure to go check that out. Find Jake on social media at ReindeerGames91 on Twitter. I am on Twitter as well at Felix_Sicard. And as far as anything else in the future here, like Jake already mentioned, we will be having a podcast out this weekend to recap the draft and maybe some crazy trades. Hopefully that's what we're gunning for here. So stay on the lookout for that. And that'll be it for us tonight, guys. Jake, any final words on this mega podcast?
Nope. I'm just very happy that Dallas Eakins is the coach. And Alonzi, people. Alonzi.
Jake is happy. I'm happy. And with that, we will bid you farewell until this weekend. Talk to you then.
Bye.